Today we are ranking every receiver in the 2025 draft class. Absolutely monster video coming up. For every receiver I talk about, you're going to see 3 graphics. I'll have their scouting report with strengths and weaknesses, their measurements and athletic testing, and then individual skill ratings. As always, I'm going to start the video by breaking down what each of the skill ratings mean so that I can define them and also talk about what skills and traits are most important for receiver. So the athleticism ratings are all self-explanatory: play strength, speed, acceleration, deceleration, and change of direction. For press coverage, I've got quickness, which includes lateral quickness, but also burst off the line of scrimmage. There's a lot of receivers that are able to beat press coverage just because they have so much juice off the snap. Strength is your ability to power through contact at the line of scrimmage, and then footwork is your release package. How many different techniques do you have to beat press coverage? How polished and concise is your footwork? For route running, I've got a lot of different ratings. Strength is your ability to withstand contact throughout the route. It also includes using your hands and physicality to separate at the break point, whether it's a push-off, wipe technique, anything to release contact. And then quickness and burst are kind of similar, and a lot of times they correlate, but it's a key distinction that I wanted to make with these ratings. Quickness is specifically your foot speed in and out of breaks. Burst is your ability to explode at the top of the route and actually create separation out of your break. So there's a lot of receivers that might have really quick feet when they're running their routes, but when they're actually changing directions, they aren't covering a ton of ground with that step out of the break point. Savvy is your route running nuance and deceptive footwork at the top of the route. So if you're just kind of counting your steps and running the route exactly as it's drawn up on the playbook, you aren't doing anything to set up your breaks, you're going to have a low rating for this. But if you're using rocker steps and head fakes and you're getting the defender to open their hips away from the direction that you're breaking, that's going to give you a high rating here. Efficiency basically refers to wasted movement. So there are some players that might have the athletic ability to run really crisp routes, but they're taking a extra step or two into the top of the route. Sometimes players will unnecessarily drift into contact and they aren't able to get out of their breaks cleanly. Stop routes are just anything where you're cutting off the route on the vertical plane. So that's a hitch, a curl, a comeback. This rating is going to correlate to deceleration, but there's also an art and a technique to running these kind of routes and like really selling the vertical push and then sinking your hips and cutting it off. Double moves are pretty self-explanatory, just, sluggo, stop and go, anything like that. And then zone route running comes down to cutting off your route at the correct point so that you're mid-pointing to zone coverage defenders. It also includes adjusting your route throughout the play so that you're staying open. And I factor in how quarterback friendly you are on scramble drills for this rating also. For catching, the first rating is just open catches, so basically focus drops. We've got catch radius, ball tracking, body control. Ball tracking is like hand-eye coordination, tracking the ball over your shoulder. Body control is how you fight for an established catch space. Jump ball is essentially like a 50-50 high point, goal line fade type of throw. And then contact catch is your ability to secure the catch through contact as you're getting hit. For yak, we've got elusiveness, power, and speed. Those are all self-explanatory. And then miscellaneous includes fumbles and run blocking. For the fumble rating, basically like if you don't have a career fumble, I just gave you a 90 and I kind of scaled it down through there. Maybe if you had like one fumble 3 years ago, you get an 85, something like that. All right, so on to the rankings. Like I said, I have 41 receivers graded, and to make this not a 3-hour long video, I am going to have to be kind of brief talking about the priority free agents and late day 3 picks. I have scouting reports written for 35 of these receivers, so you'll start to see those pop up once we get higher up in the rankings. And my wide receiver 41 is going to be Will Sheppard out of Colorado. He's 6'2", 198 pounds, good size, pretty good jump ball receiver. What was disappointing for a player of his archetype is that his hands on underneath targets were pretty inconsistent, and then just not a very good athlete, not an advanced route runner, struggles to really create separation. I don't really see a whole lot of upside with Will Sheppard. At wide receiver 40, I've got Blayne Taylor out of Abilene Christian. So I was watching the Shrine Bowl one-on-ones, and I'm like a third of the way through. I see Blayne Taylor run this route, and I had never heard of him going into it, but I immediately paused what I was watching, went and watched all of his tape, and there's definitely some flaws to his game that made me end up giving him a priority free agent grade, but there's still a lot to be excited about with him as a priority free agent. He's 6'3.5", 215 pounds, almost 35-inch arms, 99th percentile arm length for a receiver, and he isn't the most fluid receiver, but he's a decent route runner for his size. What was really disappointing though is that he just doesn't have as good of hands as I expected based on his physical profile. 11.3% career drop rate, and he's only caught 30% of his career contested targets. Based on his size and level of competition, I was expecting that he was going to be someone you just throw the ball up and let him get it, but didn't really do that at a high rate. Next up, I've got Sam Brown out of Miami, transfer from Houston. And heading into the year, he had a lot of day two hype. I was never that fond of his tape, but definitely seemed like a draftable prospect. I thought he was much better though in 2023. This year, he was like Miami's fourth or fifth best receiver if you include Elijah Arroyo. He has good speed and explosiveness, but really struggles against press coverage, not a very detailed route runner, and lacking physicality and consistency at the catch point. At 38, I've got Antwane Wells Jr., goes by Juice Wells. At one point, he was considered like a high-end receiver prospect, had over 1,100 yards in 2021 at James Madison, transferred to South Carolina where he had 940 yards, 6 touchdowns, got injured for the 2023 season, and then transferred to Ole Miss. And I mean, since transferring to Ole Miss, it seems like he pretty much forgot how to play football. He was only 3 for 12 on contested targets in 2024. Drop rate skyrocketed from 2.8% for the first 3 years of his career to 15.2% after transferring. So basically lost all of his ability at the catch point that made him an effective receiver, and then doesn't have the route running or athletic juice to really offset that. He's an example of what a low rating for nuance and savvy when it comes to route running looks like. He does nothing to disguise his breaks. Pretty much any SEC defensive back with any experience can just read his stem and know exactly what route he's running and get a good break on the pass. Rolls in and out of breaks, doesn't really have sudden bursts to recapture momentum as he breaks. His Shrine Bowl tape was actually really good, but his tape last year at Ole Miss was disappointing to say the least. At 37, I've got Jacolby George out of Miami, a slender, kind of undersized receiver. He was the player on the receiving end of a lot of Cam Ward's extended plays last year. Definitely somebody I could see the Titans targeting as a priority free agent just because of the connection that they have. I think he's a decent route runner, does a better job in contested catches than you would expect, but just not a great athlete for his size. And then my final priority free agent grade is Jamaal Pritchett out of South Alabama, 5'8", 170 pounds, and calling him a receiver is kind of a stretch because he didn't really run a full downfield route tree in South Alabama's offense. Pretty much exclusively played a gadget role. 31% of his total yardage in 2024 came on targets behind the line of scrimmage, which was the highest rate in this class. Had one of the lowest average depth of targets in college football at 7.1 yards. He's sudden, fast, explosive, really good start-stop ability. He can make defenders miss after the catch, but he's not a polished route runner. For as quick as he is, there's way too many false steps, and it causes him to either drift out of breaks or allows defenders to clue in on what route he's running. Could maybe be a 4th or 5th gadget type of receiver, but I think the absolute high-end comparison with him is Wan'Dale Robinson, and even getting to that level, I think he would need some development for sure. On to the draftable grades. At 35, I've got Theo Wease Jr. out of Missouri, transfer from Oklahoma. He's an X-receiver with really good size and length, advanced footwork, nice release package. He's just a mediocre athlete, and I don't think he's enough of a technician to really separate against NFL man coverage. He doesn't have the burst off the line of scrimmage or the speed to really stack press man or even pose enough of a threat downfield to get corners leaning backwards. Doesn't have the fluidity or flexibility to get in and out of breaks quickly enough to create separation. And then he had that game-winning touchdown against Oklahoma, his former team, but I thought his ball tracking skills were pretty disappointing, and there was a lot of production left on the field because of that. At 34, I've got LaJohntay Wester out of Colorado. He's a gadget slot receiver, really good speed, can start-stop on a dime. He can be really productive on screens, jet sweeps, anything where you're getting the ball out in open space. But for such a small player, 5'9.5", 163 pounds, 7th percentile arm length, he has incredibly reliable hands. Only a 3.9% drop rate in 2024, also caught 8 of 12 contested targets. Obviously, when you're projecting him to the NFL, he's not going to be like a high point jump ball guy, but a lot of receivers of this archetype have issues catching the football. That is not the case with LaJohntay Wester. For his size, though, I didn't think he was a special athlete. He has flashes of nice route running, but a little bit of hip tightness and some freestyle tendencies at the top of routes. You know, there are times that he does a great job setting up his breaks, but just doesn't do it consistently enough. And that's ultimately what has him below my 33rd ranked receiver, which is Jimmy Horn Jr. out of Colorado. So when I'm watching the quarterbacks, I'm not necessarily paying attention to the specific receivers that each quarterback is throwing to. I just see Shedeur Sanders throwing a bunch of screen passes. And then when I get to the receivers, you know, normally you don't see a college offense that's able to support 2 full-time gadget receivers, but it makes sense with how many screens they threw. Jimmy Horn Jr. is a very similar player to LaJohntay Wester in terms of archetype. He's undersized. They actually both ran a 4.46 in the 40-yard dash. They're kind of 2 key points that I think separate Jimmy Horn Jr. from LaJohntay Wester. Like I mentioned with the hands, Wester is very reliable catching the football. Jimmy Horn Jr. has some drop issues, and I think with Horn, the lack of catch radius really shows up as a problem. He actually improved his drop rate from 2023, but overall, hands are still pretty shaky, and Jimmy Horn Jr. really needs an accurate throw that's right on his frame to have a realistic shot at it. Even on plays where he's still able to make the catch, you know, if it's a 5-yard hitch that's just a little bit off of his frame, most receivers would just be able to extend and then turn and run, but he's got to fully lay out for it, and a lot of times he ends up falling on the ground and can't do anything after the catch. The reason I have a higher grade on Jimmy Horn Jr. is that I think he's a lot more fluid and sudden athlete moving laterally, and I think he's a bit more advanced as a route runner. But both of these guys I think should be day 3 picks, and I think could fill kind of a Isaiah McKenzie type of role in your offense. At 32, I've got Jackson Meeks out of Syracuse, a big physical X receiver. It felt like 75% of his production was either back shoulder fades or diamond release quick slants against press coverage. A diamond release is basically like you're running a slant route, you've got inside leverage, you're going to give a jab step to the outside to fake the outside release and then cross his face back inside. He has really good physicality and body control at the catch point. Really just the lack of speed and explosiveness, I think, limits his ability to create separation, especially projecting to the NFL, but you even saw that pop up as an issue against ACC competition. Just doesn't have the dynamic athleticism to keep defenders honest and threaten a 2-way go, threaten a vertical push. In the NFL, he's going to have to win by being a technician, and he's going to need a more varied release package, more consistent deception and salesmanship at the top of routes. At 31, I've got Daquan Felton out of Virginia Tech. He was a Feldman's Freaks List guy, didn't test quite as good as maybe the projections were, but 6'0", 213 pounds, ran a 4.5 in the 40-yard dash. He's developmental in almost every aspect of playing the receiver position. Only had 360 yards in 2024, didn't have a 100-yard game. He's a very underdeveloped route runner, kind of the definition of a step counter, which is like, you know, the route in the playbook says you take 4 steps upfield. He's going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then braking. Just doesn't do anything to set up his breaks. I will say, at least from watching the 2 Virginia Tech receivers in this class, I thought they had some of the worst quarterback play of the guys that I evaluated. Pretty much anytime Daquan Felton got open down the field, he was getting overthrown. And so you can kind of tack on like 4 receptions for 200 yards to his production, just the way you think about it. The reason that I have Daquan Felton still with a draftable grade is because he does have really enticing physical traits, and I think he's the second best run blocker in this class. Now, I value run blocking for receivers a lot more than I think most people do. Number one, because it's important for your run game to have receivers that can block, but I also think it's one of the best signals for just your overall effort as a player. If you give really good effort in the run game, that tells me that you care. And for a prospect that needs a lot of development in the other aspects of the position, I'm a lot more willing to bet on someone that I feel like cares about getting better. I've also found over the last few years a really strong connection between a receiver's effort in the run game and the stuff that I hear about them off the field in terms of football character. I asked a scout at the combine for like his 2 or 3 best interviews from the week, and Daquan Felton was one of the guys that he mentioned. And it seems like a lot of the guys you hear not so great reviews about, don't give very good effort in the run game. I actually found Daquan Felton kind of midway through the season. I was just looking for players to watch. Went to PFF and I sorted by run blocking grade. He was the highest graded run blocker in this class. So I just watched all of his run blocking snaps. His size gives him kind of an automatic advantage as a run blocker. He didn't have quite as many dominant finishes and pancakes as my top run blocker in this class, but what really struck me about his tape is he didn't have any losses or even negative plays on his run blocking tape. Never gets beat, never misses an assignment, just extremely solid and consistent across the board. Next up, I've got Ricky White out of UNLV. He is a big play, deep threat receiver who also contributes as much on special teams as probably any receiver in this class. Had a handful of blocked punts, I think 3 or 4 across his entire career. He's had 23 receptions of at least 30 yards since 2023, which is the second most in the FBS over that time span. Ran in the 4.6s at the combine, which does not match up with his tape at all. Improved that at his pro day to an unofficial 4.44. He has really good speed and acceleration on tape, extremely slippery and elusive with the ball in his hands. He can plant and spin out of tackles immediately after the catch. Has some flashes of complex footwork as a route runner, but kind of tight when he's trying to sink his hips and snap out of breaks. Needs to get a lot smoother and efficient with his transitions between route phases. And, similarly, there are some nice reps against press coverage, but overall struggles with contact at the line of scrimmage. So I just don't feel great about him as a route runner, at least day one in the NFL. I thought his hands were kind of inconsistent. 8.2% drop rate in 2024 isn't terrible, but really struggles at the catch point in contested catch situations. More of a player that's going to let the ball drop in the bucket than attack it in the air at its highest point. So there's some enticing stuff on tape, but just has to polish a lot of areas of his game. At 29, I've got Maryland receiver Kaden Prather. Had pretty high hopes for him heading into the year, but was a little bit disappointed with his tape, and I think he probably ends up as a day 3 guy. So he's a big X receiver, 6'3.5", 204 pounds. He has pretty good long speed and a really advanced release package, but lacking the burst off the line of scrimmage, and so he's vulnerable to quick jams if he can't create space with his footwork. One of the better decelerators in this class. He can snap off comeback routes open to the quarterback. Also only had 1 drop in 2024, 1.8% drop rate. Like I was talking about with the burst off the line of scrimmage, also doesn't really have the burst out of horizontal breaks, and the vast majority of his production is on the vertical plane. And then for his size, a very disappointing success rate on contested targets. Didn't do a great job of working back to underthrown deep passes. The concentration, body adjustment, and ball tracking skills left a lot of production on the field. My wide receiver 28 is Konata Mumpfield out of Pittsburgh. He is an extremely dynamic route runner, probably the best route runner that we've talked about up to this point. I've actually got him with the highest rating in this class for double moves. He ran an impressive 6.69 3-cone unofficial at his pro day, which is 90th percentile. He's able to snap off his routes at crisp angles. He's got the foot speed and the hip flexibility to run those blaze outs and complex double moves with just severe, harsh directional change. Does a really good job of running like 7 stops on 3rd and medium against off coverage. He can make multiple jab steps and attack the defender's leverage, get his hips turned, and then sink his hips and create easy separation. He does a great job against zone coverage. It's what I was talking about, where like running routes against zone is a lot more than just running to the right spot and turning around to the quarterback. He's able to continue to scan the coverage throughout the play and adjust his position accordingly to keep himself open. He has really quick release footwork, but I don't think he has the size or the play strength to counter big cornerbacks that can get their hands on him. He'll get blanketed by physical press man. He has good burst off the line of scrimmage to stack press coverage within the first few steps, but doesn't have quite the second gear to build on that initial burst so deep windows close pretty quickly. Really good ball tracking skills and coordination to make acrobatic plays down the field, but had some drop issues in 2024 and kind of has a high cut, slender build with short arms, like 8th percentile arm length, 22nd percentile wingspan. At 27, I've got Nick Nash out of San Jose State. The most productive receiver in college football last year, led the FBS in receiving yards and touchdowns. I feel like he sort of ranges from above average to below average in almost every aspect of playing receiver. I don't have a ton of strong opinions about his skill set in either direction. I think probably the best thing he does is high pointing and fully extending for the ball in the red zone. He's an example of a player where like he has a 48th percentile wingspan, 76.5 inches, but I gave him a much higher rating for his catch radius because he's attacking it at its highest point consistently. Pretty consistent hands, had 6 drops for a 5.5% drop rate last year, but a few of those, it wasn't even really him dropping the ball. It's like he caught it and then kind of gave up almost, like he thought the play was over, and then the DB came and raked it out almost after the play. So kind of fluky thing there that I think is easy to correct. He's an average athlete, not particularly sudden out of breaks, but a fairly smooth mover. Needs to develop his footwork some at the line of scrimmage and at the top of routes. Despite being almost 25 years old though, I do think there is a little bit more room for upside because he only has a couple of years of experience at wide receiver. He's a converted quarterback. So a lot of the technical nuances of the position, it's easy to envision him taking a step forward there. At 26, I've got Bru McCoy, a very intriguing player. He has the prototypical build and athletic traits for an X-receiver, 6'2.5", 209 pounds, 33.25-inch arms. He has good burst off the line of scrimmage, long strider with pretty good top speed. He absolutely bullies press corners. I mean, uses his hands as weapons at the line of scrimmage. I wrote in my scouting report, he probably landed more punches on press corners than vice versa. Like, you don't really see him get jammed up that often, but he's taken the fight to his opponent. He has some hip tightness and lack of fluidity that kind of limits him as a route runner. Needs a couple extra throttle steps to decelerate on comebacks, but I think he mostly offsets that with just swift, precise footwork, runs his routes at very sharp angles. I think he can be a solid intermediate separator at the next level. And then he also punishes defenders after the catch. Like every Tennessee receiver, his route tree was just hard to watch how basic it was. So it was a lot of 5-yard hitches, but he turned those into 10, 12-yard gains consistently because he's stiff-arming the first defender after the catch. There are a lot of red flags with Bru McCoy, though. 5-star recruit and was never really able to put together a productive season in 5 years of college football. Now, last year, 472 yards. I think there was a lot of production left on the field because of Nico Iamaleava overthrows, but still, you want to see a lot more college production if you're going to take a receiver high in the draft. He has an extensive injury history, and it wouldn't surprise me if he was off of a lot of teams' boards for that reason. I mean, he couldn't participate in the pro day because he had another injury that popped up. But then the main thing on the field that was disappointing is I expected him to be dominant at the catch point, and he's just kind of passive when it comes to fighting for space and winning contested targets. Just not a consistent jump ball winner at all. If he was better at the catch point, I'd be talking about him more as like a early day 3 type of pick. At 25, we've got the single most frustrating receiver in this class, Arian Smith out of Georgia. My high-end comp for him is Will Fuller, but my actual comparison would be Garrett Wilson wearing oven mitts. He is a track star with elite speed and acceleration off the line of scrimmage, just instantly creates vertical separation against press. What makes me so intrigued about Arian Smith, though, is we see a few receivers every year of this archetype, the track star that runs in the 4.2s, really fast and explosive in a straight line, but they just don't know how to play the position. And a lot of times these receivers are really stiff changing directions. They can't sink their hips on comebacks. They can't really run any sort of intermediate route tree. So maybe they had some decent production in college, but when you get to the NFL and, every corner is fast, they know how to take away a one-dimensional deep threat. Arian Smith can sink his hips. He can throttle down, sudden change of direction, really good burst out of breaks, knows how to use body lean and head fakes to freeze defenders at the top of the route. If he had just average hands, I would have an early second round grade on him probably. The problem is that he has the worst hands that I've ever seen from a draftable receiver prospect. In 5 years of doing a 300 plus player board, I've never seen a receiver with worse hands. Over the last 2 seasons, he has 13 drops and an 18.8% drop rate. I'm not like a huge Carson Bech defender, but I feel like he would get less hate if you just adjusted for all of the big time throws that Arian Smith dropped. It's honestly like a coin flip whether he's going to secure an open catch. And then he's also completely unable to make difficult adjustments or secure a catch through contact. He's caught just 3 of 18 career contested targets. The raw separation ability is special, and I'm willing to make an exception to a certain extent with drop issues and stuff like that, but with Arian Smith, it might just be an insurmountable problem. At 24, I've got Ja'Cory Brooks out of Louisville, 6'2", 184 pounds. He's a really solid X receiver with nice footwork as a route runner and at the line of scrimmage. Just not a great athlete, and also had really bad drop issues across his entire career. He's a really crafty route runner, understands how to get corners to turn their hips and set up his breaks. The speed and explosiveness, though, I think are pretty average. Over a 10% drop rate for his entire career, but he did catch 16 of 23 contested targets in 2024, which is about as high of a success rate as you'll see. I think he has a decent chance of sticking around and being like a wide receiver 4 on a roster for a while, but I'm not sure he has the upside to really be too much more than that. Next up, we've got Tez Johnson out of Oregon, one of the lightest players in NFL history. At 154 pounds, that puts him as the lightest receiver in my database that I'm calculating the percentiles from, but he moves exactly like a 155, 160 pound receiver should. He's a human joystick, blazing top speed, incredibly explosive, really dynamic, changing directions. Now, his 40-yard dash was definitely disappointing, running a 4.51 at 154 pounds. For me, the way that I analyze combine testing is I will never just see a number or see a time and then adjust my grade based off of that. It's always something that, causes me to go back to the tape and reevaluate what I thought of that player's athleticism. And, there are some players that just aren't good at running a 40-yard dash, but they're actually really fast on the field. And I think that's the case with Tez Johnson. Like, he is not a 4.51 player in terms of play speed. This year, the NFL has put out the Next Gen Stats tracking data from the on-field workouts at the combine. And I've started to integrate that into my athletic scores. And looking at Tez Johnson, his top speed on the go route drill was 98th percentile across the last 3 years. What I've found across all of the workout metrics that they have, the go route I think translates most to top speed because it's the one where you're actually hitting your second, third gear and like running as fast as possible. I think Tez Johnson's size is a major issue when projecting to the NFL, but I just don't view him as a 50th percentile speed athlete. Like, I think at a certain point you just got to watch the tape and use the testing as kind of a guide to lead you to certain players or cause you to reevaluate what you initially thought. Ran a 94th percentile 3-cone, 77th percentile shuttle. I think the other metrics definitely do line up with the tape. He needs some technical development, but he has elite potential as a route runner, and then he's a weapon with the ball in his hands. I have him with the highest elusiveness rating after the catch, 98. I'm very conservative giving out 95 plus ratings. Like, you got to be truly elite in that area. He converted 75% of his third or fourth down targets in 2024, which was first in the FBS. And that really comes down to the spatial awareness and the burst to beat pursuit angles to the sticks. Also had a really low drop rate in 2024, just 3.5%. The weaknesses for Tez Johnson are kind of what you would expect. In Oregon's offense, he was given so much space to operate. You watch that Penn State game, which was one of his most productive games and kind of put him on a lot of people's radars. He's sprinting like 15 yards down the field before anyone even makes contact with him because college defenders are so worried about his speed. NFL defenders aren't going to give him that much of a runway. When you've got corners that can match his speed and they're going to get up on the line of scrimmage and be physical with him, he's going to have to really develop, the hand usage and footwork to be able to avoid and play through contact. So I think Tez Johnson can be a productive player in kind of a niche specialized role. I would push back on the Tank Dell comps. I think that Tank Dell, like even on his college tape, showed the ability that he can be a complete receiver despite being an outlier in terms of size. Like you watch him at Houston, I mean, he was just a machine carving up press coverage. We haven't seen that from Tez Johnson. I don't think he has the nuance or the ability to adjust tempo and pace to run the kind of route tree that Tank Dell does, at least as of now. Like obviously that's something that he could develop. At wide receiver 22, I've got Chimere Dike. I think that's how you pronounce it. One of the best testers at the combine, 4.34 in the 40-yard dash, 77th percentile 3-cone. He has easy acceleration and speed off the line of scrimmage. This is the guy you want to target if you run a lot of deep crossing routes and overs. If he's got off coverage with outside leverage, he pulls away from that instantly, and it's just really hard for defenders to recover leverage in those situations. When I turn on his tape, it was kind of the Leonardo DiCaprio meme because a lot of similarities in the route tree to Ricky Pearsall from last year. Does a great job of running those blaze outs and corner posts. He can stem the deep safety into declaring his hips and opening to the sideline, vacate the post, and then instantly cut inside. He has really long arms for his size and a pretty good catch radius. He can quickly track, adjust, and attack the ball in the air. He makes a lot of difficult catches, but has some focus drops and really inconsistent at keeping his hands activated and ready to play the ball out of his break. There's a lot of times where he'll just be late to attack it. We haven't really seen him against press coverage. He ran kind of a specialized route tree, and I think Florida's offense schemed up a lot of open opportunities for him, and then he doesn't bring really anything after the catch besides speed. My 21st ranked receiver is Dont'e Thornton Jr. out of Tennessee, 6'4.5", 205 pounds, ran a 4.3 flat in the 40-yard dash. One of a few players this year with a surprising disparity between 40-yard dash and vertical jump, only a 16th percentile vertical, which is kind of interesting. He's kind of a pure size speed project. Route tree was extremely basic in Tennessee's offense, essentially just ran 3 routes. It was either a glance, so kind of like a deep slant route, it was a 4-yard hitch, or a vertical route. He rounds his breaks, glides in and out of transitions instead of snapping at a sharp angle, doesn't have a lot of deception at the top of routes. He's kind of stiff changing directions. I think there's a reason that he did every drill except for the agilities. There's some receivers that play in these kind of offenses where I feel like the route tree is really holding them back, but with Dont'e Thornton, I'm not sure that you would really want him running too many other routes besides what he ran at Tennessee. He had drop issues early in his career and improved his drop rate in 2024, but I just don't think he looks very natural catching the football. He kind of fights the ball in the air, and then he can just stride out and burn open space after the catch, but not very elusive with the ball in his hands. Only forced 2 missed tackles in 2024. At wide receiver 20, I've got KeAndre Lambert-Smith out of Auburn, and I didn't have time to write a scouting report for him because just watched him actually, but I think he's one of the more underrated receivers in this class. He's almost 6'1", 190, 84th percentile arm length, ran a 4.37 in the 40-yard dash, and then you look at the tracking data from the combine, he's above 70th percentile in every drill and had the highest max speed in the circus route and the over shoulder adjust. So he's got the size speed combo. He is great at the catch point, does an outstanding job of tracking the ball, adjusting to difficult targets deep down the field. He's a solid route runner. There are some examples of crafty footwork, but not a ton of burst out of his breaks. I think he's mostly going to be a linear type of player. And then after the catch, really impressive anticipation of pursuit angles with his back to the defense and a quick transition from receiver to runner. KeAndre Lambert-Smith is a player that pretty much nobody outside of my guy Jetpack Galileo on Twitter is talking about, but I think he'll be an early day 3 pick and could be a solid, productive wide receiver too. I really like him. Another underrated receiver is Isaac TeSlaa out of Arkansas, transfer from Hillsdale College. I watched him pretty much solely because of his combine performance and was not disappointed with his tape. So 6'3.5", 214 pounds, ran a 4.43 in the 40-yard dash, a 92nd percentile short shuttle, 39.5-inch vertical jump, 129-inch broad. Just an extremely well-rounded athlete with an enticing combination of size, speed, and fluidity. His production at Arkansas was pretty modest, just 883 yards over the last 2 seasons, but he got open a lot more often than he got targeted. I think if he was really featured in their offense, he could have been a lot more productive. Didn't have a single drop on 100 targets over the last 2 years at Arkansas. Excellent body control and high point ability on contested targets. He's another player that I think has really smooth and efficient footwork and change of direction ability, but just lacks the separation burst at the break point. When he's making a 90-degree turn, he struggles to really accelerate out of that break, and corners are able to stay in phase if they have decent athleticism. But I think he can be a really powerful possession slot with some lineup versatility. Next up, we've got Xavier Restrepo out of Miami, another player with a lot of 40-yard dash discourse. So he's about 5'10", 209 pounds, ran a 4.83 at Miami's pro day. He said on Twitter that he tweaked his hamstring before he ran, and that's what resulted in the slower time. A lot of times players or agents will say stuff like that to, kind of justify being slow, but I actually believe him. I don't think on tape he's a 4.83 athlete. If I had to guess his 40-yard dash purely based on his film, I would say 4.62. He's not a burner, and speed is definitely a weakness for him, but it's not that much of a limiting factor. He's not a vertical threat. He's not somebody that you're going to send on slot fades, but his speed is adequate for the archetype of player that he is. He's an underneath chain mover separator type of receiver. I also think looking at his next gen stats tracking is pretty indicative of what his play speed actually looks like. He was in the 60 to 80th percentile in gauntlet drill, circus route, over shoulder adjust, sail route, but then first percentile in the go route, which does line up with the tape. When it's just reaching your top speed and trying to stack someone down the sideline, that's not his game, but speed within the 20-yard range I think is perfectly adequate. So extremely productive player, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, holds the Miami record for career receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns. He's going to be an extremely reliable intermediate target. He's got the lateral quickness to separate out of breaks, does a good job of disguising his routes with the stem, doesn't telegraph his routes until he breaks. Over the last 3 seasons, he has just a 3.2% drop rate and 58% contested catch rate. For somebody with a 6th percentile wingspan, he does about as good of a job as you'll see at adjusting to inaccurate throws. He has incredible flexibility to contort his body and make acrobatic adjustments over the middle of the field. There was one play against Virginia Tech, I think, where he slipped out of his break. Cam Ward threw it to him, and he was still able to make the catch laying down on his back to convert a 3rd down. But again, just not a great athlete, undersized, definitely a slot-only player because he doesn't have the vertical speed, and he really struggles with aggressive jams at the line of scrimmage. Both of the Florida State matchups the last 2 seasons, I think, were pretty concerning tape for him. They play so much man coverage at Florida State, and he really struggled to separate there. My 17th ranked receiver is Pat Bryant out of Illinois. Another big X receiver, 6'2", 204 pounds, shorter arms, but he does have a 78-inch wingspan, which is 66th percentile. He's one of the best receivers in this class at tracking the ball over his shoulder through contact. I was putting together the cut-ups for these receivers before I recorded, and it felt like half of Pat Bryant's highlight reel was just contested go routes down the right sideline. He caught 8 of 9 go route targets last year and led the Power 4 in go or fade receptions. He does a good job releasing against press, uses his length to counter physical punches at the line of scrimmage, has the play strength to absorb some contact, understands how to attack leverage as an intermediate route runner, and I think has surprising fluidity for a player of his size. He can break efficiently at sharp angles. I think he's an average athlete. His movement skills are adequate, but That's not where he's going to win in the NFL. So that kind of lowers his grade. And then the biggest concern for me actually was that he had his 3 least productive performances against the 3 best defenses that he faced last year. Against Penn State, Michigan, and Oregon, he was held under 40 yards in each of those matchups. My wide receiver 16 is Jaylin Lane out of Virginia Tech, another player that I watched because of his combine performance, and he did not disappoint. It's funny, like it seems like every year there's a handful of receivers that nobody's ever heard about heading into the combine. They test really well, and then you go to their tape and it just kind of never really shows up. Jaylin Lane isn't a perfect prospect by any means, but you absolutely see the dynamic athletic traits on tape. 4.34 in the 40-yard dash, 85th percentile 3-cone, 40-inch vertical, 132-inch broad jump. He has electrifying deep speed, instant acceleration. He's loose and fluid, changing directions as a route runner, sudden start-stop ability after the catch. He's just an incredibly dynamic athlete in every sense, and he's one of the most creative route runners in this class. When he's got a defender playing off coverage, he just gives them an onslaught of rocker steps and deceptive footwork to force them on their heels, get them to turn their hips. He can cross a defender's face and create so much leverage with just a single step, and really runs his routes at an unpredictable tempo that defenders just can't get a read on, shifting his speed up and down throughout the stem. There's still room to improve his efficiency as a route runner, but Jaylin Lane has so much separation potential. The reason I only have a day 3 grade on him is that he really struggles to secure difficult catches in traffic. If the throw isn't wide open, you're pretty much holding your breath. He doesn't have a lot of focus drops, but just 3 of 16 on contested catches over the last 2 seasons. Has a really hard time tracking the ball over his shoulder deep down the field, which, kind of limits your big playability as a deep threat. Into the top 15, we've got the first receiver with a day 2 grade, and that's going to be Tai Felton out of Maryland. 6'1", 183 pounds, field stretching speed, ran a 4.37 in the 40-yard dash, 39.5-inch vertical, 130-inch broad. He has incredible burst off the line of scrimmage, just leaves press corners in the dust, only needs a couple steps to stack press down the field and build separation. But he's somebody that I think can run the full route tree. He's a twitchy route runner, sudden horizontal breaks. He can sink his hips when he's at max speed and decelerate on a dime. Pretty much uncoverable on comebacks. I have him with the 3rd highest rating for deceleration and the highest rating for stop routes in this class. He's incredibly productive and elusive after the catch, forced 26 missed tackles in 2024. And I started watching his tape just a few weeks into the season. He was one of the first guys that I kind of identified as a breakout player that wasn't on my radar heading into the year. He started out 2024 with 4 consecutive 100-plus yard games, but the way that he finished the season, it's like every game that I watched, I would lower my grade on him a little bit. Only had 100-yard game in the final 8 weeks, and that really comes down to just inconsistency catching the football. He was still as good of a route runner, against better competition. The speed still translated, but he had 8 drops in the last 7 games of the 2024 season and just wasn't able to convert on a lot of potential explosive plays because of drops or poor focus at the catch point. 38.5% career contested catch rate. Has a hard time adjusting to jump balls and attacking contested targets. If he was more consistent catching the ball down the stretch, he'd probably be like a top 7 or 8 receiver for me, but I'm thinking late day 2 just because of the inconsistencies over the second half of the season. At wide receiver 14, I've got Elic Ayomanor out of Stanford. He is almost 6'2", 206 pounds, ran a 4.44 in the 40-yard dash, had 80th percentile vertical and broad jump. He's kind of a difficult player to get a read on. I would say I like the idea of Elic Ayomanor more than I actually liked his tape. He was very productive despite a just disastrous surrounding core at Stanford. Ayomanor has the combination of size, I think average to above average athleticism, route running and release footwork, and then flashes at the catch point to where you could see him becoming like a complete, low-end wide receiver 1. I just didn't think the speed and explosiveness really showed up on tape the way that it did at the combine. And then despite flashes, just way too inconsistent catching the football. 8.7% career drop rate each of the last 2 seasons. Has some dominant wins on contested targets, but just inconsistent, leveraging catch space, high pointing the ball, and then surviving contact at the catch point. The other thing I have to mention with Ayomanor is he is the best run blocker in this class by far, and one of the best college run blocking receivers that I've ever evaluated. They'll use him as like an insert lead blocker at the point of attack, but even when he isn't involved in the play, he's looking to end his opponent's life. I mean, the backside of a bubble screen, it's like Mad Max Fury Road. If you're a DB that's not that interested in playing the run, not looking to, embrace contact, it's going to be a long day for you if you're lined up against Elic Ayomanor. And I mean, his run blocking reel is just incredible. It's kind of like I was saying earlier in the video, receivers that have inconsistencies or kind of unrefined elements to their game, I'm a lot more confident in betting on them to improve in those areas if they give maximum effort as a run blocker, because I think it speaks to your overall effort and how much you care about playing football. And I mean, Elic Ayomanor checks that box 1,000 times over. Can't say enough good things about what he gives you in the run game. Next up, we've got Tory Horton out of Colorado State. A forgotten receiver in this class, only played 5 games in 2024 due to injury. I watched all 5 of those games and then went back and watched all of his snaps from 2023. And man, he is just such a complete, well-rounded receiver. I think extremely underrated at this point in the process. As far as athleticism, he pretty much checks every box. He has good straight line speed and acceleration. He's fluid changing directions, and then he can decelerate and cut off stop routes on a dime. His route tree at Colorado State was a little bit more limited than I think he's capable of. He's somebody that I think can run the complete route tree because he has the movement skills for it. He explodes out of horizontal breaks, recaptures his top speed very quickly out of the break. I have him rated as the best route runner against zone coverage. Just incredible advanced spatial awareness and coverage recognition to identify the optimal break points within the zone. But then, like I was saying, constantly repositioning himself after he sits down to stay aligned with the passing lane and keep himself open. He has a less than 5% drop rate each of the last 2 seasons. He's also very competitive and focused at the catch point. He can secure the ball through contact, high point it in the air, and then he's sudden, elusive, and fast with the ball in his hands. Really, my only concerns with Tory Horton is that he's kind of tall and slender, 6'2.5", but 196 pounds, and I think struggled at times with physical press coverage and then kind of gets weighed down by grabby man coverage down the field. But I have a hard time seeing him as anything less than a really, really good wide receiver 3. My wide receiver 12 is Jalen Royals. Very interesting player, 6 foot, 205 pounds, so average size. Wingspan is 19th percentile. I would say he's an above average athlete, good, not great speed. Every episode I get on here and I complain about the Tennessee and Ole Miss offense, but my God, the Utah State offense is probably the worst I've ever seen as far as evaluating receivers in the passing game. I mean, good Lord, it is just screen after screen after screen. Jalen Royals is capable of so much more than what they ask him to do. So when he isn't running a screen, I thought there were flashes of really good route running, but he's got to get a lot more consistent in that area. He can make sharp cuts on intermediate routes, does a great job of exploiting bail technique and cover 3 and kind of weaving in and out of the defender's blind spot to get him turned around. For most of these players, I'm just going to be showing their highlights on the screen, and you'll see with Jalen Royals, there are flashes where he does a great job of setting up his breaks, stemming away from the direction of his route, turning the defender's hips, but there's way too many examples of him step counting, telegraphing his route. He's got to become a lot more technically consistent to be an intermediate separator in the NFL. Despite his average size, he has outstanding ball tracking ability on downfield targets. His body control and coordination at least partially offsets his size limitations. I thought in 2023, he ran some of the best double moves in this class. They were kind of rushed, it seemed like, this year on a limited sample size, but really impressed with what he showed a couple years ago. I don't really see wide receiver 1 upside with Jalen Royals, but I think he'll be somewhere in that wide receiver 2 to 3 range. And his upside is going to be determined by just getting more consistent as a route runner. He has the natural ability for it, but there's just too much, conflicting information on his tape. My wide receiver 11 is Tre Harris out of Ole Miss. 6'2.5", 205 pounds, ran a 4.54 in the 40-yard dash, 37th percentile. I think that mostly lines up with tape. He's not a burner down the field, but I think like adequate movement skills. Another player like I've talked about that really only ran 3 routes. 70% of his routes in 2024 were verticals or hitches. With that being said, I do think he has more potential as a separator, and it's really based on 3 routes from his tape. There were a couple against Kentucky and then one against Wake Forest, I believe, running like a sail route, and then ran a really nice in-breaker against Kentucky. He can snap out of breaks pretty effectively for a receiver of his size. Ole Miss just never gave him the opportunity to do that. But, overall, he's unproven as a full field route runner. What Tre Harris really brings to the table is his contested catch ability. He makes some absolutely silly contested catches. There's some ridiculous adjustments to the ball and like one-hand snags on his tape. I've noticed that Tre Harris is kind of a favorite among a lot of the fantasy football community, and they do really good work as far as like analyzing data and contextualizing it, comparing it to previous years. Tre Harris, I've seen grades out really well in a lot of metrics that they use. I will say I think that's pretty inflated this year by the competition that he was facing. So he only played like half of the year because of an injury, but he had 534 yards against Furman, Middle Tennessee, and Georgia Southern. So I've seen a number floating around that he had like some insanely high yards per route run against man coverage. First of all, he hardly ever faced man coverage, and I think when you filter out the FCS and really lower level competition, that kind of stabilizes and is a lot closer to average. But yeah, Tre Harris is a very interesting player. I think somebody that could thrive given a more advanced route tree and usage in a pro style offense. We're now into the top 10, and that's going to start off with the most disappointing receiver in this class, to me at least, Isaiah Bond, coming in at wide receiver 10, 58 overall. So heading into the year, Isaiah Bond was my wide receiver 1. I had him as a top 5 player in this class. And I think just purely based on natural talent, he's one of the 3 or 4 most talented, skilled, and athletic receivers this year. I absolutely loved his Alabama tape. I think based on that, he seemed to me like, somebody on the Jalen Waddle to Zay Flowers spectrum, where he can be this electrifying deep threat, obviously, but where he's really going to kill you is the way that he can snap off comebacks, deep outs, sail routes. He has the complete package as far as burst and vertical speed, but also the sudden change of direction to break off routes at tight angles. But Isaiah Bond ended up playing through an injury this year, and over the second half of the year, he pretty much became an afterthought in Texas offense. After week 5, he only had 146 receiving yards. Even back when he was healthy, I don't think they really used him in a way that played to his strengths, just as far as the kinds of routes that they were having him run. Isaiah Bond's worst route, in my opinion, is a stop route against off coverage. He just hasn't figured out how to sell the vertical push to create underneath space. He kind of like drifts into stop routes and creates unnecessary contact at the top of the route, and it felt like that was pretty much half of what they had him do. He isn't very effective on contested targets, just 4 for 16 over the last 2 seasons, and wasn't given as many opportunities this year, but wasn't able to come down with some tough catches down the stretch. During the season, I've got a handful of teams and units that I just watch every week or every couple weeks. Texas's offense was one of those, so I was watching Isaiah Bond pretty much every week. I got pretty deep into the year and still had a really high grade on Isaiah Bond despite his lack of production, just because I believe in the natural talent. Kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, though, was some of the lack of effort that he showed as a run blocker. Players of his size, are never going to be great run blockers. I'm not talking about losing one-on-one reps. There were just so many plays where he showed an inexcusable lack of effort, like not even engaging with his assignment. And to me, I think NFL teams are going to see that and be like immediately turned off. If I was a GM and I was meeting with Isaiah Bond at the combine, I mean, I would be putting these reps on the screen. First thing I ask him is, hey, so what was the strategy here? But yeah, I think his talent and athleticism is enough to where I still have a higher grade on him than a lot of better and more productive receivers. But I expected him to come back to school and try to put together a fully productive season and, establish himself as a first round pick. I think his tape, some of the lack of effort at times, and I've heard some stuff about football character. I think that might cause him to drop to day 2. He is 81st on the consensus board though, and it would not surprise me if a team takes a shot on him a lot earlier than that. My wide receiver 9 is Savion Williams out of TCU. I think he has the highest upside of any receiver in this class. I think his size, explosiveness, yak ability, and contested catch skills would all qualify as elite. So he's almost 6'4", 222 pounds, 32.5-inch arms, but he has almost an 81-inch wingspan, which is 94th percentile. As a vertical threat, he erases cushion with elite burst and top speed, but he isn't just a linear player. He has loose hips to explode out of breaks at sharp angles. He can abruptly decelerate on stops and comebacks, does a good job of using his length to amplify separation out of breaks, and then he carves up press coverage, lethal diamond release, automatic separator on quick slants. I have him with the best overall yak score in this class. He just really brings everything to the table that you want for a receiver after the catch. He's elusive. He's got the speed to burn pursuit angles. He can lower his shoulder and truck a defender in the open field. TCU used him as a traditional running back, like taking carries out of the backfield. He actually led FBS receivers with 322 rushing yards last year. I think he has a floor of being a gadget yak receiver, but his potential is so much more than that. But the drawbacks with Savion Williams are pretty concerning. So he's a fifth-year senior with modest receiving production, just 611 yards last year, which was his career high. His hands are really frustrating because it's like the higher difficulty the catch is, the more consistent he is in securing it. When it comes to like acrobatic receptions through contact in the back corner of the end zone, he's one of the best in this class. I mean, 73% career contested catch rate. But if you're throwing him a 7-yard hitch, it's a coin flip whether or not he's going to catch that. An 11.8% drop rate in 2024, 8 total drops. I didn't chart them, but it felt like 6 or 7 of those were within 5 to 7 yards of the line of scrimmage. He gets compared to Quentin Johnston because he has dreads and played at TCU. I don't really think it's comparable. Now, I was lower on Quentin Johnston. That was one of my good draft takes, but watching him at TCU, he just never looks natural catching the football. Another player, like I talked about, who just fights the ball in the air. That applies to open targets, contested targets. Savion Williams has focus drops, and I'm not saying that's not a negative or not a weakness, but I just think it's a lot different than Quentin Johnston. And then Williams, definitely needs to become a more consistently detailed route runner, but I thought his separation potential is a lot more than Quentin Johnston ever showed. Savion Williams is the definition of a boom bust prospect. I could see him leading rookie receivers in total yards. I could see him being out of the league after 2 seasons. At wide receiver 8, I've got Jack Bech out of TCU, kind of the polar opposite to Savion Williams in a lot of ways. I think he has such an incredibly high floor as a receiver, has the size to play X, Z in the slot. The main limitation is really just straight line speed. Didn't run a 40-yard dash at the pro day or combine. He has automatic hands, just 1 drop on 91 targets in 2024, 61.3% contested catch rate for his career. When it comes to open targets, contested targets, he's extremely consistent. He doesn't have top tier explosiveness, but he is a very efficient and smooth route runner. Pretty much no wasted movement in his routes. Every step has a purpose. He can make swift lateral cuts to win leverage at the break point. He has good salesmanship as a route runner, and then I think his strength and physicality at the break point is as good as it gets in this class. He has rare hand usage, whether it's like the push by technique or wipe technique to just break contact at the break point and augment separation. Like I said, his explosiveness and speed I think are average to below average, but outside of that, he's an incredibly clean receiver prospect. My wide receiver 7 is Kyle Williams out of Washington State. The hype train has left the station with Kyle Williams, and I'm fully on board with it. I've been avoiding listening to Chris Sims' receiver rankings video until I recorded this one, but I saw he had Kyle Williams at wide receiver 2, which I'm not completely there, but respect the take. Kyle Williams is undersized, 5'10 and a half, 190 pounds. He's an older prospect, but not what I would call a late breakout necessarily. Like, he's had 5 years of solid production. In 2023, he had 842 yards, almost 1,200 yards this year. But size is pretty much where the weaknesses end with Kyle Williams. And I called him an older prospect. Like, he'll only be 22 and a half years old when he gets drafted. I guess experienced is probably a better term. I think he's the best receiver in this class against press coverage, specifically when it comes to his release package and footwork off the line of scrimmage. He has so many different strategies and tools in his belt to beat press coverage. He can beat any kind of leverage. He paces and tempos his releases masterfully. And then a very good separator who runs a complete route tree. As a deep route runner, he uses rocker steps to separate on deep posts. He can attack the blind spot and cut off comebacks really quickly. Just efficient, repeatable footwork in and out of breaks with very few false steps, hardly any wasted motion. He's effective and productive after the catch, good elusiveness and contact balance, forced 20 missed tackles in 2024, and he led FBS receivers with 3 screen touchdowns. His drop rate in 2 years at Washington State was just 5.8%, and he improved his contested catch rate each of the last 4 seasons, 62.5% in 2024. He's a high-level separator that produces after the catch and has reliable hands. Doesn't have the ideal size, and I think he's a good athlete, but probably an average athlete for his size. But for someone that can play, I think all 3 receiver positions, feel really confident about Kyle Williams' floor as a prospect. My 6th ranked wide receiver is Jayden Higgins out of Iowa State. Incredible size, 6'4", 214 pounds, 93rd percentile arm length, 92nd percentile wingspan. Tested a little bit better than I was expecting at the combine, ran a 4.47 in the 40-yard dash. His vertical and broad jumps were a lot better than I would have guessed. He's an incredibly detailed and efficient route runner. I just didn't think that he had the burst and the suddenness out of breaks to separate against tight man coverage, but his fluidity, whether it's at the top of the route or against press coverage, really impressive for his size. He's a safety blanket with outstanding hands, 3.3% career drop rate, and, has the size to be a red zone mismatch and, kind of play goal line fades like a power forward. His success rate on those contested targets was a little bit disappointing relative to my expectations, but I think still firmly a strength to his game. I've been a pretty big Jayden Higgins fan since I first watched him back in October, November. And at pretty much any point in the process, if you asked me about him, I would have said he's an underrated receiver. I'm not fully on board with some of the post-combine hype that he's gotten, just because I don't think that his testing quite translates to his tape. And there were just a few concerning reps where he really struggled to explode out of breaks and create separation. So I kind of wonder what his upside as a route runner is, but I really like him as a possession receiver, and he can definitely do more than just catch 50-50 balls down the sideline. My wide receiver 5 is the other Iowa State receiver, Jalen Noel. Undersized at 5'10", 194 pounds, but tested great at the combine, and that absolutely translates to the tape. 4.39 in the 40-yard dash, really good short shuttle and 3-cone, and then 97th percentile vertical and broad jumps. He has easy burst off the line of scrimmage, instantly accesses his second gear to extend separation down the field, smooth changing directions. He can really explode out of breaks, and then one of the best receivers in this class at sinking his hips and decelerating. I think right now he's kind of just a deep threat vertical plane receiver that you want running goes and comebacks, but I do think he has a ton of potential as an intermediate route runner. He just kind of seems to rely on his natural athleticism to separate, really needs to sharpen his break angles and eliminate the rounded breaks and kind of just drifting through the break. You want him to get a lot more consistent snapping those off at tight angles. There's examples, like there's a route against Iowa where he shows exactly what you want to see from him on every route, but too many examples of him not really setting up his breaks and kind of just gliding through the transition. Later in the year, he really improved on contested targets. His game against Miami, he was 3 for 3, but I think that overall that was pretty inconsistent. And then, you worry about him dealing with physicality at the line of scrimmage and getting off a tight press coverage. My wide receiver 4 is Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. Such a narrow range of outcomes, but I think they all end with him being a quality, productive receiver. I don't really see him being a true number 1, but I think he's going to give you somewhere between 700 and 1,000 yards for the majority of his career. He played almost exclusively in the slot at Ohio State, and I do think that's where he projects the best in the NFL, but I wouldn't categorize him as a slot-only receiver like I would say for someone like Xavier Restrepo, for example. I think he can play outside if he needs to. He's just not the elite explosive athlete to where he's going to be too much of a vertical threat against NFL corners. He did run a pretty solid 40-yard dash, 72nd percentile. I think his speed and athleticism is fine by NFL standards, just not elite or top tier. He's a very technically sound route runner with smooth, efficient footwork. Once again, lacks that overwhelming burst out of breaks. You don't see him create significant separation with that first step at the top of the route. And I think that issue shows up most often when he's facing trail technique. He really has a hard time separating from trail technique corners that are reading his hips and they can anticipate and mirror his break. Egbuka, I would say, is an elite zone route runner, and probably the best thing on his tape is watching him run these sail routes into zone coverage and cover 3. He does such a good job of disguising his route, selling the vertical push, getting the defender to bail, open his hips, and then breaking to the sideline. One of the reasons that I actually think he could be a fairly effective outside receiver is what he showed against Notre Dame. Now, it's not like he was playing X and facing like tight press man, but Notre Dame is a very man-heavy scheme, and even in the slot or at Z, a receiver can at least show release footwork that would be translatable to facing press coverage. On Jeremiah Smith's touchdown, Emeka Egbuka actually ran the most impressive route on that play and just completely broke the defender's ankles. And then the last thing to mention with Egbuka is I think he's one of the better run blockers in this class for sure, especially when it comes to effort and motor. Still had a lot more losses in the run game than some of the bigger receivers in this class, but you can just tell sometimes by the way that a team uses a receiver as a run blocker how much they trust him, and like they trusted Egbuka to be the lead or insert blocker. And honestly, got to give credit to Ohio State's coaching staff and like the players also, but their skill position players gave maximum effort in as blockers, whether it's in the run game or pass protection. Travion Henderson I talked about is one of the best pass blocking running backs that I've ever evaluated, but Quinshon Judkins, no slouch in that area either, and Emeka Egbuka really plays with an edge in the run game. My third ranked receiver is Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona, somebody that is, it seems like, falling on a lot of people's boards, but to me, he was one of the biggest risers from this past season. Watching his 2023 tape, I was just not impressed at all. It was like the Stephen A. Smith face watching his tape. Writing his report over the summer, I had a really hard time coming up with any strengths that weren't catch point related. I thought he was a stiff, dull route runner, gave you nothing after the catch. Really, to me, he was just purely a jump ball guy, and I mean, his ball skills are as good as I've seen for a college receiver. His arm length was just 45th percentile, but did have a 65th percentile wingspan. Really just has rare ball skills in every sense. Magnetic hands, very few focus drops, has outstanding focus in tight windows to make acrobatic catches. He can adjust and contort his body to make the catch and get his feet in bounds, establishes catch space, boxes out the defender, works back to the football. When it comes to catching the ball, I mean, I have very few complaints with Tetairoa McMillan, but he took a step forward this year in two key areas that led me to raise his grade from I think early 3rd round grade heading into the year to a late 1st now. There is a noticeable improvement as an intermediate route runner from 2023 to 2024. I thought he was a completely different route runner, just with his nuance, his footwork, the ability to use steps purposefully at the top of the route to set up his breaks, specifically against off-man coverage when he has space to work with. I think saying that Tetairoa McMillan can't separate is just incorrect. For a player of his size, he's really efficient sinking his hips and either decelerating or changing directions. You see him run some really nice whip routes in the red zone. And then the other area he improved was after the catch. In 2024, he forced 29 missed tackles, which was more than double of his total from the previous 2 seasons. That's a dynamic aspect of his game he unlocked that pretty much didn't exist before 2024. Now, I do have some concerns with Tetairoa McMillan, and it starts with his ability to beat press coverage. He is kind of billed as this physical X receiver, but I think he really struggles against press and doesn't play with anywhere near the level of physicality you would expect for his size. It starts with his lack of burst off the line of scrimmage. So much is made about his 40-yard dash. Ran a 4.53, which I think lines up almost perfectly with what he shows on tape. When it comes to after the catch and he's got a long runway to stride out and build up speed, he can actually like run away from pursuit, and I think his top speed is fine, but he just doesn't pose any kind of vertical threat to outside corners, and he's rarely able to outpace man coverage on deep routes. The lack of release explosiveness really prevents him from stacking man coverage within the first few steps, and there's a lot of reps where he either gets planted on the ground or walled off to the sideline. Because he doesn't have that upfield burst, he has to take wide angles of departure to get around press. And kind of going back to the physicality, his freedom of movement is easily restricted if the cornerback's in phase. He really struggles and gets slowed down by grabby man coverage. Now, I do think, especially later in the season, he flashed some effective release footwork. There were also a couple reps where he was able to swat down the hands and counter aggressive press punches. But overall, like, I watch his press tape and I just have a hard time projecting T-Mac as an X receiver. I think he's a big slot ideally. His lack of motor and effort in the run game also really bothered me for a player of his size. Because he's so big, he can kind of just stand in front of his assignment and at least get in the way as a blocker. But I mean, there's just like no motor or sustain after his initial strike. It's not like tanking or really even affecting his grade, but definitely something that I thought was worth noting. My wide receiver 2 is Matthew Golden, who really broke out over the second half of 2024, took over as the primary target in Texas' passing game. I don't think he's an elite athlete on tape in terms of speed and explosiveness, but very fluid and quick to separate from man coverage. A crisp and efficient route runner with nimble footwork to run complex routes, really good timing. He's able to kind of adjust and fluctuate speeds to set up defenders, and then a deep bag of releases to beat press coverage. He has incredible hands, really good spatial awareness and focus to track the ball through crowded passing lanes. He can work back to underthrown passes and locate the ball through a defender while he's being face guarded. He would run these outbreaking pylon routes in the low red zone, and it didn't matter how tight the window was, he was bringing those in consistently. Now, he ran a 4.29 in the 40-yard dash, which I will definitely give him some credit for because I did not think he was that explosive and fast on tape. I thought, you know, if I had to guess his 40 time, I would have said like 4.47, 4.48. You can obviously train to run the 40-yard dash and like how to get out of your stance and everything like that. But at a certain point, you know, you can't fake a 4.29. That means that there is some speed in there that he didn't show on tape. There's like one play that just kind of sticks out in my mind when I think about his speed, and it's him getting hawked down from behind one of the first plays against Arizona State. I don't know, man. I just sometimes after the combine, especially, I'm listening to people talk about Matthew Golden, and you know, I heard someone say that he was between Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill as an athlete, and to me, that's just like you saw the RAS score and you're kind of letting that do the talking. I'm still very high on Matthew Golden, and I think he probably is faster than I gave him credit for initially, but I would definitely not say that he has elite speed in terms of his play speed, at least. And my wide receiver 1 is Luther Burden out of Missouri, and it's important to make the point here that these are, for the most part, purely just tape grades. I'm very selective when it comes to factoring in off-field concerns in the negative direction for players. Occasionally there's somebody where the off-field reviews are just like so overwhelmingly negative that I've got to be real about them, like Jermaine Burton last year. I had an early second round grade on him based on the tape. Would have been a top 32 player for me, solely looking at that. But everything you hear about him, whether it's talking to scouts or like people that are super plugged in, like Daniel Jeremiah, Dane Brugler, it just seems like this dude is a head case in terms of football character. So I decided to lower his grade to a more realistic range. With Luther Burden, there's a lot of stuff that's come out about his practice habits and like diva tendencies or whatever. I actually wouldn't deny the validity of that. And if I cared more about being right with these rankings, I'd probably factor that in more and adjust them to probably the early 20s or late teens on my board. And I know a lot of people watch these kind of videos, especially for certain positions for like fantasy football purposes. So, if you're watching this to try to figure out who to draft in your dynasty league or whatever, I would definitely take that into account with Luther Burden. But I have him as a top 10 player in this class purely based on the film. And even when you account for some of the football character stuff that's got him falling, out of the first round in mock drafts, I think just based on the on-field evaluation, he's one of the more underrated first to second round players in this class. He had a very disappointing 2023 season in terms of production, barely reached half of his receiving yardage total from last year, but I actually came away from his 2024 tape with a higher grade on him than I had heading into the year because I thought he answered a lot of the questions that I wanted to see based on his 2023 tape. To me, his decline in production was entirely a result of his situation and usage. His quarterback, Brady Cook, played through a wrist injury and was much less effective and accurate. That eliminated a lot of his catchable downfield opportunities. You watch him in 2023, Burden is the king of the slot fade. He was targeted 13 times on slot fades last year. He only had 5 slot fade targets in 2024, and only 2 of them were catchable. So that's a huge portion of his explosive plays that were just taken off the table. Missouri's offensive coordinator, I thought, did very little to feature him, and he was kind of at certain points like an afterthought in Missouri's offense. There was that article that came out about how he's a 5-star recruit and Missouri had to kiss his ass to get him to stay there. It's like, how about you kiss his ass by throwing him the football? I mean, that's the first place that my mind would go. When you watch Missouri's passing game, it's like he'd get a couple screen targets, he'd run a bunch of decoy motion routes, a lot of clear outs, and then at the end of the game they'd be down 7 and they're like, hey, don't we have this 5-star like best recruit in program history? Why don't we throw him the ball to bail us out of the situation? And he always came through because he's a great player. He's built like a running back, has a really compact frame, and he is an absolute weapon after the catch. Led FBS receivers with 30 force missed tackles in 2024. He's elusive, powerful, and fast as a runner, but I do think that his yak ability has led some people to kind of underestimate the completeness of his game. I don't think he's limited to this slot-only gadget role. Like, to me, he's a true downfield separator who can be a vertical threat, an intermediate route runner, but then also one of the best receivers after the catch in the NFL. He has really good burst off the line of scrimmage to stack man coverage. The second gear, I think, maintains vertical separation, but doesn't really build on it. And then he can snap off routes at sharp angles, create separation out of the break. That was the biggest area of improvement, I thought, from 2023 to 2024. Last year, I felt like he kind of just relied on his athleticism athleticism to separate. This year, his footwork was a lot more crisp and nuanced and really took a step forward in that area. Over the last 2 seasons, his drop rate is just 4.5%. Contested catch rate was 56%. Outstanding focus tracking the ball over his shoulder. Sometimes he could be a little bit more aggressive attacking the ball in the air, but overall, really solid ball skills. Again, the football character stuff does kind of concern me. And, you know, if I was worried about like people looking back at my board a few years later and, you know, thinking I'm smart, I would probably lower his grade a little bit. But to me, I'm just trying to give you my opinion based on watching the tape. And I think that he's the best receiver in this class, a top 10 player, and somebody that I would be comfortable spending a mid to early first round pick on. Now, you can pretty much take every receiver we've talked about and bump them down one spot, because Travis Hunter would be my wide receiver 1 in this class if that's the position that he ends up playing. My answer to what position should he be in the NFL is whichever position I watched him play most recently. I think that he's clearly the best corner in this class and clearly the best receiver in this class. He's my number 1 player overall, and a very, very small portion of that grade factors in his positional versatility. I think at either position individually, he's a blue chip prospect. He has elite hands, just a 2.3% career drop rate and 63% contested catch rate, rare ability to high point and go up and get 50-50 balls. He's a fluid and dynamic route runner, extremely sudden and elusive after the catch. Colorado hardly ever faced press coverage, so I wish there was more tape of him releasing against press. That would be really my one hang-up, but on limited snaps, I thought he looked pretty good against press. To me, Travis Hunter is like a combination of Odell Beckham Jr. and Darius Slay with a little bit of Kyle Fuller mixed in. Just a rare prospect, and especially when you consider Abdul Carter's injury concerns, I think clearly the best player in this class. So that's going to do it for the receiver rankings. Unlike quarterback and running back, there's actually a lot of players that I wanted to get to. I just didn't have time. Eventually, I had to kind of declare a stopping point and record the video. But guys like Kobe Hudson, Elijah Badger, Andrew Armstrong out of Arkansas, Efton Chisholm out of Eastern Washington. There's even a few more players that I want to get to eventually, but didn't have time to watch them for this video. If you want to see all of the graphics that I showed for these receivers for every player in this class, you can find those on my draft board, which I'll link in the description. And also make sure to follow me on Twitter. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and a comment to help boost the algorithm. Really appreciate that. And I will see you guys for the next video. Probably going to be edge rusher and defensive tackle. I wasn't able to start this channel until a few weeks ago because of a non-compete. It's a long story there, but might not end up having time to cover every single position. I'm going to do my best to get to as many as possible. Going forward, I definitely want to start these rankings videos by February, so I have time to cover every position, but I will try to get to the ones with the most interest at least.